Starfleet has produced a lot of ships over the last few centuries. From the earlier iterations of the Enterprise to the experimental transwarp ships of the 2370s and 80s, there's no shortage of different vessels to talk about, and many of them were extremely quick. In fact, a bunch of them were even able to break Warp 9, and one of them did much more than that. So without further ado, here are some of the fastest Starfleet ships ever built. Honourable mention, the USS Discovery. Now, while the travel potential of the USS Discovery is extremely high, the method it uses to cross great distances is so different to the technology used by every other ship on this list, and by Starfleet in general, that I wasn't sure whether to include it or not. In the end though, it can get places really fast, even if that depends on your definition of travelling. So I decided the best thing to do was include it here as an honourable mention. Unlike traditional Starfleet ships, the USS Discovery's primary method of travelling great distances wasn't a warp drive, but a spore drive. Built around 2256, this cross-field class starship was equipped with brand new and as yet untested technologies, including an experimental method of travel that utilised a connective spore that bridged all locations across the galaxy. This collection of spores was known as the mycelial network. Now, to be clear, the Discovery was fully warp equipped and could travel utilising that method too, but often its warp core found itself simply gathering dust, as who would choose to run when you could instantly translocate? However, while the tech was revolutionary and extremely efficient, essentially breaking the rules of the universe, it would also be short-lived, at least in the hands of a functioning and healthy Federation. At some point just after the Human-Klingon War, the Discovery would enter a wormhole and reappear 930 years later, never to return to its own time. Moreover, there's also been heavy indication in episodes of Discovery's spin-off show, Strange New Worlds, that all of this may have taken place in a different continuity to the Prime timeline completely, which kind of makes sense, given that we've never heard about this technology in the years since, or about some of the other elements of Discovery's story, like Spock having a sister, for example. Still, if that's true, it's probably for the best. After all, if I was Janeway, I'd be so annoyed. Number 7. The USS Defiant. The smallest ship on this list, the USS Defiant was instrumental in many Federation battles, in spite of its size.
Tough little ship. Little.
Commanded primarily by Captain Benjamin Sisko, the Defiant was capable of achieving Warp 9.2 initially, but was then upgraded in 2371 to be able to reach speeds of Warp 9.5. But while it survived many extremely dangerous situations and conflicts, its luck would finally run out at the Second Battle of Chintoka, where it was destroyed by the Breen during the Dominion War. Another Defiant-class ship named the USS Sao Paulo would be renamed as a replacement Defiant in the ship's honour, and resume the original's duties where it had left off, once again under the command of Captain Sisko. But while the second Defiant was largely the same, the battle-worn and enhanced original model was still the quicker of the two siblings. Number 6. The USS Enterprise E. When we think of the Next Generation crew, most of the time we remember them flying the iconic USS Enterprise D. But once that ship was put out of commission, at least for a little while, the crew would be gifted a new starship from Starfleet Command. And while nothing would ever replace the Enterprise D for most of us, me included, its successor, the Enterprise E, was, on paper at least, an upgrade in almost every sense. Larger, more manoeuvrable, better shields, better weapon systems, and of course, faster top speeds. Achieving warp of 9.6, it remains one of the fastest ships Starfleet has ever produced, and that's doubly impressive when you consider that it is by far the largest numbered ship on this list, at 685.7 meters in length and 250.6 meters in width. What's more, this baby weighed over 3.2 million metric tons before anyone was on board, and had a maximum capacity of over 2,500, making it the heaviest starship to achieve these speeds by an absolute mile. Number 5. The USS Zheng He. The Zheng He is by far the most enigmatic ship on this list. A much later addition to Starfleet's Armada, we know that this Inquiry-class vessel was at least active in 2401, and commanded by acting Captain William T. Riker during the defense of the M-class planet Gulion 4 from the Zhat Vash forces. During that battle, Riker proclaimed that the Zheng He was not only the most powerful ship in the fleet, but also the fastest. Whether this statement is accurate, or just a bit of trademark bravado from Captain Riker, we may never know. But such claims would put it at least in the top 5 quickest ships, right? I mean, I trust Riker.
I don't need your fantasy women.
Number 4. The USS Prometheus. In operation from late 2373, the USS Prometheus was an experimental prototype ship designed primarily for deep tactical assignments. Equipped with regenerative shields and ablative hull armor, the ship even boasted holo-projectors across the entire vessel to allow its medical hologram free roaming privileges in an emergency. Such additions would prove lucky, as in 2374, the Prometheus was hijacked by the Romulans, who almost made it back to the neutral zone with Starfleet's prized prototype, before being foiled by a medical hologram that had been transmitted over subspace by the then stranded Starfleet starship Voyager, in order to try and establish contact with the Federation. Thanks to the Doctor's efforts, however, the Prometheus would remain in Starfleet service, and would even face off against common foes like the Borg in the years that followed. In terms of speed, it said that the ship could reach warp 9.9 for a short time. Perhaps even more impressive, however, was the Prometheus's ability to separate into 3 separate ships for enhanced tactical warfare maneuvers. Unlike saucer separation, each of these 3 separate ships were equipped with warp nacelles and a warp core, meaning even after separation, each part of the Prometheus was capable of warp travel. Number 3. The USS Dauntless. Initially built as a fake Federation starship by an alien race, the Dauntless was first encountered by the USS Voyager in the Delta Quadrant. However, while technically not a Starfleet vessel at that time, in subsequent years, Starfleet would indeed begin building their own Dauntless-class ships, in largely the same design, utilising the original as a base. Much like the Discovery, the Dauntless would not use traditional warp technology to achieve great speeds, but would instead use a quantum slipstream drive. This faster-than-light technology was based on the one used by the Borg, and involved utilising the vessel's main deflector to create a quantum field, which would subsequently allow the ship to penetrate the quantum barrier. However, despite the many advantages of slipstream travel, and the fact that, unlike traditional warp, the tech required no antimatter to operate, it had its own limitations, chief of which was the constant need to adjust the quantum field to prevent the slipstream from collapsing. If this happened, the ship would be thrown violently back into normal space, which could lead to it being damaged or destroyed. With all this in mind, the Dauntless class's slipstream travel remained a limited use commodity. Number 2. The USS Protostar. An experimental ship developed alongside the Dauntless class, it was part of an initiative by Starfleet to develop new transwarp travel. This was, in large part, a reaction to the journey of the USS Voyager, and Starfleet's desire to revisit, chart and explore the Delta Quadrant, which sat over 70,000 light-years from their base in the Alpha Quadrant. Commanded by Captain Chakotay, the Protostar would utilize a mini artificial star, or protostar, within its engine technology to allow for what was known as proto-warp. This small star was housed within the engine section of the ship, alongside 2 more warp cores, and its exotic matter dilithium matrix was connected to a retractable third warp nacelle. What's more, the ship was also extremely small compared to some of the others on this list, with only the Defiant coming in smaller. This allowed for increased acceleration and maneuverability, making the Protostar one quick little ship. As for exactly how quick, it's difficult to say, but we know it can't have broken warp 10, even at proto-warp, so my guess would be something like warp 9.99999? Who knows? Number 1. The Cochrane. In 2372, while stranded in the Delta Quadrant, Flight Control Officer Tom Paris developed an experimental new form of transwarp, utilising a new form of dilithium that had been discovered in an uncharted asteroid field. As this dilithium was able to stay stable at higher frequencies, it allowed for a ship's warp drive to be altered in order to increase the warp acceleration past warp 9.5. Adapting one of the USS Voyager's Class II shuttlecraft, Lieutenant Paris renamed the ship the Cochrane, in reference to the father of humanity's warp technology, Zephram Cochrane, a man who somehow achieved warp without any dilithium or antimatter, it seems. But anyway, after ironing out a few issues with velocity differentials between the fuselage and the warp nacelles by setting up a depolarization matrix around the craft's main body, Lieutenant Paris would, after several simulations, perform the first successful breaking of the warp barrier, achieving warp 10 and entering subspace, whilst simultaneously being everywhere in the universe at once. However, while this might sound like it was a success, it led to some interesting consequences, which involved mutation at the cellular level, but I'll save that story for another video.
I'm not sure which one is the captain.
So there we have it, 7 of Starfleet's fastest ships. Oh, and one honourable mention. While I still think the mycelial network is kind of cheating, It's nonetheless interesting to see all the ways in which Starfleet has tried, failed, and succeeded in pushing the envelope of faster-than-light travel over the decades. But what do you think? Are there any ships that I missed that you feel should have been included? And would you be interested in a list of the fastest non-Starfleet vessels in the Star Trek universe? Let me know in the comments below, along with any other ideas or feedback. Oh, and also don't forget to add any questions you might have about Star Trek lore, and I'll do my best to answer them. Finally, if you could give this video a like and a subscribe, that would be awesome. And share it if you can. The channel's still small at the moment, but it's building every day, so every little helps. Anyways, until next time, live long and prosper.